Morning everyone. It's good to be the first session of the day. Today I want to tell you some stories about Coolblue. I think the brief was Coolblue, a CI/CD story. I put that proposal into these guys a little while ago. The story's changed a little bit since then. Not the topic. The topic is still CI/CD. You still will learn a bit about how Coolblue is doing it and some of the cool things that we've implemented, but it's more about what it takes to get to the next level of CI/CD. All right. So what I did this talk at Tekorama, and it was what it takes to go from 100 deployments a day to more than 1,000 deployments a day. Right, which I think a lot more people find interesting than just another "you need automated tests" checkbox. Right, that still is in here, but we'll get to that. I'm Pat, for those of you that I haven't met yet. I'm currently a development manager in Rotterdam, based in Rotterdam, working for Coolblue. I'm an Aussie. My Nederlands not niet zo goed, so today will be in English. Sorry about that. If you need me to slow down, just raise your hand up, alright? I do, sometimes when I get carried away, I do talk quite quickly. I've been developing for a long time, but now I've moved into this more of a development manager role. It gives me an opportunity to talk to you guys, but it also means that, yeah, I'm not hands-on as much as I was. I'm a proud father and husband as well. My family's come over with me, and yeah, we're enjoying our time here so far. Today, as I said, is all about Coolblue, telling you some stories about our history, our past, and also where we're going into the future, the short-term future, at least I can share with you guys. But before I start that, I want to rewind a bit. All right, I want to tell you guys a little bit about where we were. So, why does having 1,000 plus deployments a day matter for us? Right? And that I don't have a good answer to. I don't know why it matters for you guys that we deploy more than 1,000 times a day. Right? I'm going to fall back on the standard software development tack of it depends. Right? The stuff that I described today may or may not apply to you. I'm hoping that you can take some stuff away and implement it in your day jobs. But yeah, at the same time, please don't take this as an authoritative this is what we need to do because Coolblue does it. So that's basically where these two come in. You ain't going to need it, and keep it simple. My advice to you, even though I'm going to be telling you these stories about many, many deployments a day, if it doesn't apply for your environment, please keep it as simple as possible until you guys are comfortable to hopefully scale to this level as well. Okay? So that's my disclaimer. For Coolblue, it is important though. All right? I don't know whether you guys have seen this before, but this is around about 2012 here, and you can see a almost doubling year on year on year on year on year, with very little signs of slowing down, thankfully. The same is true for our development department. All right, so in about 2012, we had a good group of people, but since then, it's been doubling and doubling and doubling and doubling, taking us to around about this. We have about 30 teams at the moment, around about 200 developers in-house. Tech department of about 250 people then, because there's some leads and scrum masters and a bunch of other people as well involved. Why are we this big? Right? It all comes back to this. Now, how many of you have bought something from Coolblue? Nice, that's what I like to see. Right? Is there anyone here that hasn't? No, I won't single you out. I won't single you out. All right. We do everything that we do is for a smile, right? We're out there to make you happy, and we think that's our common differentiator in the marketplace, and I hope that you guys have experienced this as well, all right? Tech is no different. Everything we do in tech, we do to make you guys, our customers, smile, all right? The other thing I want to briefly touch on before I go into, you know, why 1,000 plus is important to us is what's the difference between having 100 deployments a day, 1,000 deployments a day, 10,000, what does it matter? How many of you guys know who this is? Come on, proud Dutchman. Yeah, Dijkstra, yeah? Yeah? 010. No, he was born in Rotterdam, studied in Eindhoven. It's, yeah, he made a very, very astute observation many, many years ago. I think this is 1960-something, 1969, I think. And it starts with this, right? Apparently, we're trained in our industry back then, but I think even more so now, to disregard differences in scale. So we're trained to treat them as gradual differences, and there should be no significant difference between them, right? You notice this with your kids growing up, or you notice this with your company scaling, right? Day to day, you don't notice the difference, but over time, yeah, all of a sudden your child's 18 and moving out, right? The example that he uses, which I think is very astute, is a child compared to a jet plane, right? Both of them can move. One moves significantly faster than the other. In terms of objects that can move, they share that characteristic, but they share very little else, right? So your child can't travel at the speed of a jet plane, or if they can, that's something you should probably investigate. The same is true for Coolblue, all right? So these small differences in scale, we don't really notice till about 2012, right? Then you start noticing, oh wait, we're actually making some pretty amazing steps here. But for a very long time, we didn't notice any gradual differences, all right? So I said today's going to be focusing on the further part, you know, what it takes to go from 100 to 1,000. But before that, for those of you that aren't doing CI/CD, or maybe are at a smaller scale, I want to run through basically a few prerequisites. All right. In late last year, September or so, a friend of mine, Pepine, sat down, and we thought, what are the core building blocks that take you from nothing to something, right? To take you from 0 deployments a day, maybe 1 a month, maybe 1 a year, 1 a quarter, if you're working in finance. Sorry, Fanny. And then what does it take to get to, you know, a reasonable rate of turnover? And for us, we came up with this, and we presented this at Tech Days. We called it the Faster to Master checklist, because our talk was called Faster to Master. Basically, we said you need to have these, all right? I'll give you guys the checklist at the end. Hopefully you can take it back to your organizations and just tick it all off. That would be great, all right? Then I think you're in a very good state to move forward. For Coolblue, we definitely did this, right? We sat down, we had a look at all of them. There's a few here that we're not doing so well at, sure, but we do have all of them in place, all right? So we're happy to say, yep, we have all these prerequisites. And we love them, all right? Without them, we couldn't have got to the level that we're at. All right, and we love them because all these people helped us put them there. All right, there's been lots of beers, there's been lots of parties, there's been lots of good successes along the way, but at the same time, yeah, we had to have these prerequisites in place, including all the good people, before we could get to where we are today. All right. So now, stories. That's all the theory done. Now I'll tell you some fun stories, huh? I want to tell you 4 stories today. Hopefully I've got the time. I'm going pretty well. About responsibility, autonomy, ownership, and failure. All right. For us, these are the 4 key areas that took us from 100 to 1,000, took us from one stage to the other. All right. And I hope you'll recognize some of these stories as we go along, or maybe you can map them to the experiences that you've had. I'm going to start with responsibility, though. And for me, the best example of responsibility is like a hub and spoke type model. All right. How many of you have this? One big DevOps team, center of excellence, deployment organization, infrastructure team, one team responsible for everything. How many of you have something like that in your organizations? A few, right? Coolblue did as well, right? We're no different. We're no magical Spotify model type company, right? We are just the same as you guys. We started with a DevOps team, right? It's called hosting and deployment where we come from, but it's the same idea, right? And then we started adding development teams around it, right? So very early on, obviously, the development teams start to exist and the DevOps teams start to exist, or the hosting and deployment teams start to exist. And these guys have very strong ties, all right? That's what I'm trying to show here. We have development teams doing development, and we have infrastructure teams doing infrastructure, all right? And of course, as I've already told you, Coolblue kept on growing and growing and growing and growing. Now, over time, this doesn't scale, because if you've got 6 guys in the middle here, and you've got 30 guys around them, yeah, it's going to be much easier for, you know, hey, I did that last week, let me help you with it, right? We don't really need them to help us get these permissions sorted, right? Things like that. So you end up with all these informal networks, right? Hey, Jim, can you come sit with me for a little while? I know you did this last week. And that grows and grows and grows as you add more development teams, because these guys in the middle are starting to get overwhelmed now, right, to put it simply. And so the informal networks continue increasing until you realize that in the future, very near future for us in fact, the hosting deployment team was going to be completely overloaded. Their direct responsibilities were going to start failing, which is the dotted lines, and you needed to rely on the informal networks. All right. So instead, this is kind of where we are today with a DevOps team. They have responsibilities. They have informal network. We do have informal networks within the organization, but then we removed a lot of that. All right. Now, for us, we call this developer self-service. For other teams, it's called a bunch of other stuff. All right. You can map it to what it means in your organization. But for us, this is enabling developers to do it themselves and to teach other developers how to do it. All right. So it's kind of expanding the center of excellence type experience. And in the future, don't tell them this, it's being recorded, so I need to be careful, but there won't need to be a DevOps team, right? There won't need to be a single center of excellence. Hopefully that skill then will be shared amongst the organization. And there's plenty of good talks out there about how to go from that last step, how to go from a center of excellence to a distributed center of excellence. So you can look those up, but this is basically what I expect our future to look like very soon, where the deployment team is now no longer necessary. It's now, those skills are now integrated back into development teams. And we can see this here, all right? This is for me the key example of that. I don't know whether you guys can make it out, but we have, sorry, let me see if I can do this. There we go. We have 194 people in our development, in our public development channel, all right? At the same time, we have a channel called Deployment Superhero, and there's 115 of them, all right? So we're missing a bunch of people from development. It's my job to try and figure out where they are, right? But at the same time, most of these people are in the superhero channel helping each other out. And you can see that, obviously I had to blur it out, but you can see that by the faces, right? It's not one person constantly replying. It is actually developers helping developers. Another great example that I have is one of these. This is Steph. Steph is a team lead, completely not related to the hosting and deployment team. Just another developer, a team lead within a team at Coolblue. He's trying to make a CloudFormation OMS API for his OMS API. So order management system, making a web app. This is his initial stack, right? We use AWS a lot, so you'll see some AWS specific references here. But he's basically proposed this GitHub pull request. Sander is in the hosting and deployment team, the DevOps team, and has given him a hint here, all right? At the same time, the reason I've highlighted it over here, you can see the linter that we have, our automated process, has come through and said, yeah, Steph's changes that he's proposing, they look good to me, right? They're valid, they'll create a valid stack. Maybe it's not the stack he wants, but they will create a stack for him. And then all of a sudden, Sander come back in and said, oh, actually, this rule, this one little line that you've got in this pull request, it's only required when the other ones don't exist, right? So this is an example of where we're constantly upgrading, constantly fine-tuning our linter, because if Sander, it would be better if Sander didn't even need to say this, and the linter could fail you because this is so obvious, all right? So going back, having a look at all the pull requests is something that hosting and deployment team is doing now, and finding what are the common issues, right? People are adding extraneous firewall rules, or people are specifying things that they didn't need to because you can use the default instance size, things like that. So again, Steph removed it, made a PR, and it gets linted and succeeds, right? Merges, I don't need to tell you the rest of the story, but it gets merged, new stack gets created, that sort of stuff, all right? And now, as far as I know, this was a few weeks ago now, I delivered this talk and I showed Sander and he went, oh, I need to go add the that rule back to the linter. So now he doesn't need to say this anymore, right? Now this is a rule within the linter. If Steph had gone and made this PR again today, that would be a little red cross up there. It would give him information as to why, you know. So this is an example of us empowering the developers themselves to make those stacks according to a common expectation that we have at Coolblue. So that's basically how we're moving responsibility from a core team, which at least a few of you have, probably about half raised your hands, back into a development team. And I think that that's part of, that's core, that's crucial, that's really, really important to get us to the next level, all right? You can't have an overloaded DevOps team trying to sit there and press buttons for you and all that sort of stuff, all right? I want to move on and talk about autonomy. Does anyone have any questions about the responsibility one? We're quite a small group here, so it's, you know, easy for us to ask questions or to interrupt me. Feel free. but if no one has any, that's fine. You can come see me after. We can talk about autonomy for now. All right. How many of you recognize this logo? Yeah, at least a few. And this one? Yeah? Yeah. .NET developers are showing their age. Yep. Yep. This is the Log4Net logo, right? And so for me, this is a really great example of how we've given development teams autonomy, or how we've given the company autonomy. Most of you that went, yep, are probably still doing this. And we were too, until not too long ago, all right? We had Log4Net writing to flat files, sitting on spinning Rust, and then you'd beg an ops guy to come and log into a machine and lift you a log file so that you could investigate why something happened, all right? That works fine, like I said, to get you off the ground, right? If that's what you've got to work with, that's fine. For us, to get to the next level, to get to 1,000 deployments a day, you obviously can't be going, hey, Bob, the ops guy, can you jump into this machine in AWS and RDP in and grab me this file off the disk? That doesn't work anymore, all right? For us, we basically chose these to replace it, all right? There's a few logos here. I'll step through them quickly. Hopefully you recognize some of them. This is Serilog, structured logging. You can use sec or seek or SEQ or however you want to pronounce this tool on your local as a dev to examine your logs, your structured logging. But at the same time, we moved off maintaining infrastructure ourselves and into two cloud hosted options. Right? One is Splunk, the green one here, and the other one's Datadog. They don't allow you to put the logo in without putting their text in it, so I did that for them. But basically, we moved off and started rolling out these tools instead. All right. Why is that autonomy? Why does that give the teams autonomous benefit, right? And for me, it's this. This is a great example of what we've got. This is, maybe a few of you are scattered in there because most of you have bought something from Coolblue. So this is a stream of our real-time orders as they're going through, right? And we can see how many of them are timed out, how many of them are pending, how many of them... We can see immediately if this starts to drop off in rate, if this starts to go red, right? This means that team that is responsible for that one small section of the website can very, very quickly action that, right? Without having to wait for customer reports to go to customer service, or for you guys to tweet us, or WhatsApp us, or however you get in touch, and then to come back into the dev team and then be notified. These guys have this. All right, these guys have it's up on their big dashboard in their team room. These guys are watching this, all right? One of many dashboards they watch, of course. The other one is this. So, I don't know, you can't really make it out. I'll try and zoom in for you in a minute. But basically, you see an order go wrong on this slide, all right? On this screen, on this monitoring system. Or you get an inquiry from customer service, something like that. You can now hammer your order ID in, all right, from the website, so the order number that you guys have, and we can track it all the way through the system now. There's no more, can you grab me this log file from there, and then, oh, it called that web service, so we need that log file as well, and then this one. No, the team can now, and I think you can see it here, the team can now take, so it came into the CRM, it came into the web shop, it's synced to the order synchronization service, which pushed it into the CRM system in our backend. Now, this dashboard in the last few days has actually had a bit of an update as well, and now we can actually track it through individual stages of each of those as well. So it's becoming more and more granular because they're enjoying this vision, right? This ability to track down what went wrong and exactly where. So we can say that, yeah, someone placed an order using a Gen via credit card on the website, and then we internally started building the order for this person, right? This involves multiple teams, obviously, this involves multiple environments, but it does mean that customer service and also our dev teams have the ability to track things much, much easier across the organization. If any of you guys are interested in more detail on this stuff, about correlation IDs or about tracking things through disparate systems, yeah, come talk to me during the break, because this is about as deep as I can go on this one right now. But one of the other benefits that we had within the organization, talking about autonomy, how many of you have like a security department or a fraud department or a completely separate, yeah? So you've got these guys and they're sitting somewhere else, and then they say, oh, by the way, we've got to be compliant with this now, and the command goes out to the dev teams, right? Yes, that still happens within Coolblue, right? It does as well. We're no different. But at the same time, they don't need to ask the dev teams to report back on that now. The fact that we're logging all these different interactions in all the different systems means that the security team themselves, without involvement from anyone else, can go and make their own dashboards, right? They can go and track, in this case it's unencrypted, so HTTP versus HTTPS. We were going through a migration period, moving everything over, not just the public-facing website, but everything to HTTPS. These guys can actively track that, all right? And they can say, oh, these requests, and of course, I don't show it here, but you can drill down into that and say what ciphers are you using and what systems does this come from and that sort of stuff. They can track all that without having to go anywhere near a dev team. And then instead of broadcasting to the organization, we now need to become compliant, they can now go to an individual team or an individual product owner or an individual developer in some cases and say, hey, this one little thing that you're working on, we need it to be upgraded in this way. Right? Gives them a lot more power and gives the team a lot more autonomy. There's no more big broadcasts of the organization is moving from here to here. Because for the people that run the web shop, and I'm sure you guys know this already, for those of you that do any sort of web development, you've needed to be HTTPS for a very long time. All right? And now I think next week, Chrome's rolling out the fact that if you're not encrypted by default on the web, then they're going to start doing negative things to your website. Obviously for Coolblue, that's our lifeblood, so we don't want to discourage that. So yeah, but even internal systems, it's very important that they now are secured as well, because we're talking about cloud infrastructure, we're talking about distributed systems. So yeah, security can come back to the dev team. Another great example is that per environment, per team, per application, right, you can now track all sorts of metrics. And so this is where Datadog comes in. This is not structured logging, this is more like metric shipping, that sort of stuff, aggregation. Datadog's really powerful at that. This is basically the same team as before that's watching the live stream of orders coming through, right, which is good to get a feel for it. This will actually give you the longitudinal reporting, okay? I've had to blank out a few graphs and replace a few things around because I can't show you everything, but I think now if you look at this, you get a good idea of what the dev team is actually sitting there monitoring day to day. All right, this gives them a lot of power. They don't need to ask anyone for log files. They don't need to ask any other team for any sort of interaction. So that's the story that I have about autonomy, right? Putting the power back into the dev team, making sure that your tools that you've chosen within your organization, I use logging as the example, but I'm sure that you guys have different examples, making sure that the tools you use enable that autonomy from the dev team. All right. Does anyone have any questions about autonomy? No? Cool. See a few people. Cool. Then I want to move on to ownership. And when people talk about ownership, especially at Coolblue, we're talking about contracts. Right? We're talking about agreements between teams. What do you own and why do you own it? All right? And so this is true for disparate systems. Right? This team owns the CRM service. This team owns these specific subset of pages on the web shop. Right? But it's also responsible for infrastructure items. All right? So the example that I'm going to use today is this one. All right? Team City. How many of you use Team City? A few. Right? There's always a few, right? Like I said, Coolblue's the same, right? How many of you have build steps that look quite complex, right? And have, in this case, very hard-coded version numbers, right? A few of you? Yeah, you guys at the back are nodding. Cool, that'll do. Basically, this is where Coolblue was, and this got us to the point where we are now, right? In the last, probably about at the end of 2017, this is exactly what our build system still looked like. And in fact, I actually lifted this example the other day because this is a legacy application that hasn't been updated yet. So that works out well for the slides, not so well for the infrastructure. But the XUnit versions and the MS build versions here are hard-coded into the build step. Well, not hard-coded, they are configuration values and all the rest of it, but you need to step into the actual build step itself and upgrade those if you want to move to .NET Core or you want to upgrade your tooling. Instead, what we've done across the whole organization to enable the developers is move to this. Our build steps are based off a common template and have one step, and that is called build PS1. All right. Now, just here for you guys in the back. All right. So the only thing we do now is Team City calls build PS1, and then if it succeeds, it succeeds. If it fails, it fails. Team City doesn't know and doesn't care. All right. We're relying on the build PS1 logging now to report back into Team City. For those of you that want to get deeper and deeper, again, come see me after. But what this means is that the dev team can make whatever choices they want to make. All right. We've got Cake, we've got Nuke, we've got PowerShell because it's calling build PS1, so you're already in PowerShell, you might as well leverage that, or even PowerShell Core for the guys that want to deploy to Linux systems or to make, to use smaller, faster agents, that sort of stuff. You can even use PowerShell Core for this stuff. These dev teams can set up these build systems however they want. One of the questions that I had when I presented this last time was, doesn't that mean that they can destroy the agents, right? Doesn't that mean that they can maliciously download stuff from the internet and run it on the agent? And yes, the answer to that is yes, definitely, right? You're calling PowerShell. PowerShell's very powerful, right? But if you destroy that agent, you're only tripping yourself up, right? Like, you could be malicious inside Coolblue, so this may not work for those of you that are working in financial sectors, or those of you that are working in insurance, all right? But for us, we put a lot of faith and a lot of trust into our developers, and we rely on them to make sure that, not so much that they leave the machine in a clean state, because that's where you've got the infrastructure as code, way back in the checklist, all right? You need to have it so that those agents can be destroyed if there's something sick in one of them, or they're not responding anymore, right? You do need to be able to kill them to move them off and rebuild them very, very quickly. But at the same time, what actually happens to them doesn't really matter, right? You can imagine that, as an example, one of our teams uses PowerShell to install Chocolatey, uses Chocolatey to install dependencies. How many of you have used Chocolatey? You know what I'm talking about? At least a few, okay? Chocolatey is like a package manager, like an apt-get for Windows, or a yum for Windows, all right? So PowerShell, install Chocolatey, Chocolatey, install the tools that you need, now run those tools, right? Yarn, Gulp, Grunt, whatever you need. All right, it's now there installed on the machine for you. Yeah, PowerShell install Docker, Docker run these containers. It doesn't matter anymore for the infrastructure side, right? What the development team chooses to innovate on or innovate towards. All right, so containers in this example, as long as it can be run via build PS1 and give you back a success that you and your team is happy with, then you're in a good spot. All right. It also means that it goes the same the other way now. And our infrastructure team, the team that's responsible for maintaining TeamCity, I mentioned before we moved off Log4net into 2 cloud offerings, because Datadog and Splunk, because that gives us a lot of power, right? That means that we don't need to maintain it or upgrade it or make sure that it's licensed properly and all that sort of stuff, which takes a lot of the hassle away. The infrastructure team are doing exactly or the hosting and deployment team are doing exactly the same. Right, we have a massive, massive TeamCity installation that is not difficult to maintain. That's unfair to TeamCity, but at the same time is infrastructure we need to maintain ourselves. Okay. If we move to AppVeyor, a hosted service, right, that does basically the same thing, what are the ramifications for the development team? And if you're sticking to this contract, there aren't any. Right? In fact, they started setting this up, and it was as easy as creating a new account in AppVeyor, which is a cloud-hosted build system, for those of you that haven't used it before, and put in this command, and that was it. All right. AppVeyor by default has all sorts of hooks and integrations with GitHub, which you need to manually set up with TeamCity, but instead AppVeyor can do it all for you. Yeah, it publishes NuGet packages by default, which is again something you need to maintain in TeamCity. Where do you save them? Where do the artifacts persist to? These guys take care of all of that. So to move from TeamCity to AppVeyor, granted for a net cake build canary, hello world application, so it's not anything of significance, but to move from TeamCity to AppVeyor was literally like a 15-minute sign-up process, and then file new project this, all right? Now, of course, if we were to move the whole organization from TeamCity onto AppVeyor, there are other things you need to worry about. I completely agree with you, all right? So you need to figure out, like, how can you get that done in AppVeyor without clicking around the GUI? How can you set these build systems set up so that they're automatable, right, or creatable or destroyable automatically? So there are other limitations, of course. Please don't think that this is some beautiful golden rose that you should all move to when you get back to your desks. But for us, this means that those guys are free to innovate there. They're free to experiment. They're free to try this out, right, with very little or no impact on the dev team. All right, still reports back into TeamCity, can still deploy into the cloud environments that we're deploying to, can still run all the scripts that the development team have set up to run, all right, just by calling build PS1. So what does this mean for the future? All right, This is I gave this talk internally, and I put these 3 logos up, and I heard an audible gasp. So I don't know exactly what to tell you guys. Basically, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen internally. All right. Once we move to this distributed system, once we move to build PS1, and the dev teams are taking charge of this, I don't know. And the best part is, it doesn't matter. All right. Nah, I don't know. But also, it doesn't matter. So long as you stick with this build PS1, right? Whether you're doing containers, whether you want to experiment in Kubernetes, so long as you can get that set up and configured yourself, and you've got, as you saw before, the example of setting up the stack yourself, so you've got infrastructure to deploy to, you've got your deployable actions, your deployable runner, right? And then you've got your artifact. As long as you've got those 3 in conjunction, it doesn't matter what it is that you're actually deploying, right? Again, little asterisk disclaimer, you're probably getting sick of them by now, right? There are other complications that come with those things, all right? So having one dev team move off to Kubernetes because they think it's cool, and having another team completely go in another direction, right? Distributed microservices or something that's not containerized. Having teams do that does have inherent danger as well, right? And those are the conversations that we're currently having, basically last week and this week. How can we make sure that we're moving in a common direction, even though we have this separation and this distribution, all right? And the answer may very well be this one, just to recycle a slide, right? Does it really matter? Does it matter if one team moves to Kubernetes and they own it and they set it up and they maintain it themselves and they, figure everything out themselves, and another team has no Kubernetes knowledge, right? Does it matter? What are the benefits? What are the trade-offs? So for me, that's a great example of ownership. You're putting the power back into the dev team, right? Again, a lot of this is giving power back to the dev team to enable these sorts of things. But at the same time, yeah, it means that as Coolblue grows, we need to be a bit more hands-off. We can't be as centrally controlling as we were. All right. My last one, my favorite one, right? Failure. How many of you have seen me talk about failure before? I think I've met a few of you previously. I have a very long history of talking about failure, and it basically all stems from reading this book when when it came out, right? Have any of you read this book? No. Okay, if you haven't, please do, all right? For me, this was one of the biggest changes personally in my career, but also something that I've asked the few of the guys at work that are struggling how do I deal with failure? Is failure acceptable? This book really, really lays that out and explains it well, okay? The key quote that I got out of this book is to fail early, fail often, but always, always fail forward, all right? So learn from your mistakes, don't make the same mistake twice, basically go through and, improve, constantly improve by making mistakes. We see this, just going off on a tangent for a little while, we see this when we're teaching children, right? They try to walk and they stand and they trip, right? Or they try to run and they fall flat on their face. And they might do that a few times, sure, right? Especially if your kids are anything like mine and maybe a little bit slow sometimes. That's fine, right? They will trip over, but eventually, my 5-year-old boy now, he just goes nuts. He's running everywhere, all right? Those guys are the best example of fail early, fail often, and fail forward, all right? So how do we apply that at Coolblue? How many of you have seen this screen? A few. I expected at least a few, right? Every web shop has its downtime. That's fine. Right. We basically have 2 versions of this. We have, oh crap, our developers are running back to their keyboards, right? To translate for those of you that aren't Dutch. And, oops, you've gone the wrong way, all right? Which is our way of putting the blame on you. This one we're moving away from, surprisingly enough, all right? Because it's not your fault that you ended up somewhere that you shouldn't, right? So this is like the equivalent of our 404 page, all right? It's not your fault that you ended up somewhere that you shouldn't have. It's probably our fault, 9 times out of 10. Unless you're typing in something really weird and trying to stuff us up, that's your problem. But generally, it's our fault. And how do we know that it's our fault? Time and time and time again. And I'm going to rewind and go straight back to the dashboards, all right? This is an example of the dashboard that web shop performance team, or all teams dealing with the web shop, have up at all times, or in their rotation, all right? Of course, I had to blank out how many requests and how many instances and all this sort of stuff, right? But generally, all these numbers, I have no problem sharing them, right? And you guys shouldn't either. This is about failing forward. So knowing that we've got our COSA help controller, right, our key customer service helper endpoint is the slowest controller, no worries, right? I'll tell you guys that. You guys can go to the web shop and double click the COSA help, right, over and over and over again and verify for yourselves. That's fine. Hopefully, I took these slide screenshots a few weeks ago. Hopefully that's not number one anymore, all right? Because having these examples of failure or controlled failure up in front of everyone means that everyone is working towards fixing that, all right? Same with the slowest commands, same with the number of 500 responses, same with system load. If you've just deployed something, CPU utilization's fun. That's an interesting one to try and debug. But basically, you can imagine that for a web shop, watching these things fail over time is always going to happen, of course. But at the same time, yeah, we're working on it. We've got this very, very publicly available inside the organization. It's on a lot of TVs. All right. That's probably not very interesting though, because that's just a web shop, and web shops fail, and web shops have these metrics, right? And I promised you guys I'd tell you some stories. This is my favorite story about failure, all right? Or one of my favorite stories about failure at Coolblue. So we have, how many of you have had something delivered via Coolblue Besorgt? Like a fridge, washing machine, big TV? Out of pure interest, has anyone had anything delivered via Coolblue Fietsbezorg? Via the bike? No? No? Okay. Order small things. If they come from a shop near you, you'll get a really fun experience, trust me. So, it only came out last month, that's why I'm asking. So, the Coolblue Fietsbezorg, setting up that whole delivery system ourselves was not our strength, alright? That's not our key, I mean, it is a key differentiator between us and other people in the marketplace, but at the same time, that's not a core business value you think of when you think of a e-commerce retailer, right? Or maybe an e-commerce plus bricks and mortar retailer. So for us, this was a great example of start small, make a whole ton of mistakes, and then fail forward, all right? You can see down here we've got 6 errors. This is just a random snapshot from their dashboard, taken a few weeks ago. Didn't tell them I was going to do it. They got a little bit upset that this one's red instead of green, but that's fine, right? That's all part of failing forward. We have registered orders. We have where it is in the warehouse. We can see exactly how long it takes us to register bits and pieces across the organization, direct swaps. And of course, a nice big red, there's been 6 errors in the last, however long this is, last hour, I think. And this is, obviously you want to get this number down, but this is also very important to have up, right? Up in front of you, rather than just reducing the number. And how did that 6, right, if I go back here, how did this 6 come about? Well, it was because of this. And this is an example of the tooling, so going back to the tooling, making sure the tooling makes you autonomous. This is the shipment alerts channel, which those guys are obviously in. There's 9 people in their private team channel, right? Those guys are in that group, and they will get alerted immediately as soon as it starts happening. So you can see that at 1700 on a Friday, at 5 p.m. on a Friday, you can see all of a sudden stuff starts going wrong, right? And this is, sorry to ruin the punchline, but of course this is due to someone going, yep, it's time for beer, and then leaving. So, but this happens, right? And this happens all the time, and there's no worries about it. Because 9 minutes later, so the team got notified immediately. All right, 16:59, the next order came in, the next order broke. All right, okay, no worries, team got told. At 10 past 5, right, so 10 minutes later, 9 minutes according to Slack, but 10 minutes because I know how often the jobs run. All right, the OC, our operations center, our network operations, our customer service, whatever you call it within your organization, escalated the alert and said, hey, this stuff has just popped up on our health dashboard, all right? So now it's gone from the team didn't resolve it within 10 minutes, from the team out to the OC, all right? And then 10 minutes later, at 20 past, right, we start seeing everything go back green, right? And we can see that this was trending up, now it's back in the normal space, all right? Everything went green again, all right? This tells you what happened over time, or this actually shows you what the response was over time. It doesn't show you what happened. And for me, oh, sorry, yeah. So I meant to highlight, this is the team. This is 9 people got notified immediately, all right? This one's 50 people. This is like, I told you before, there's roughly 200 odd devs, right? And about 50 of them are interested in what's going wrong in shipping and delivery, all right? For various reasons. Some of them are sneaky, sticky beaks, but a lot of them are generally interested in, oh, that parcel hasn't gone out yet. But this is what happened, all right? So I told you, 5 o'clock, 10 past 5, 20 past 5. At 20 past 5, Steph, the same lead that actually made the stack before, terminated that stack, all right? He did it again at 31 past. I'm not entirely sure why this one was terminated. I think this was because it was the secondary. But he basically jumped in and had the power from him and his team to make a PR that terminated that stack, all right? Because there was a, yeah. If you want to know all about the RFO, come see me later. Basically, and this is now in front of 194 people, right? Which is scary for some people. In front of 194 members of development, it says Steph, by name, right, has terminated these instances in production, all right? And I, the AWS EC2 termination robot, am demanding an RFO from him, all right? Granted, that's not what it actually says, but trust me, that's what it means, all right? And Steph comes in a little while later and puts a nice little tick down here, right? The following morning comes in, yep, I filled out the RFO, no worries. This is in front of all of our development department, right? And this happens not very, very frequently, but frequently enough that people are used to seeing this, all right? Now, this is just a Google Docs link, right? This tells the developers that are interested, and you guys as well, nothing about what happened. Now, I can't share with you exactly what happened, but I can show you what the form looks like and what questions Steph would have had to answer, all right? For us, this is as straightforward as it gets, all right? What happened? How was it caused? What was the impact? Customer didn't get their order, and payment didn't go through properly. Website was down for 3 hours, right? It doesn't matter what the scale is. When did it happen? How long did it take? There's a few other questions on here as well, all right? They get more and more technical as you go down. But the important part for the development teams, the important part for the infrastructure teams, is what happened and why, all right? And these are gone over. We've now changed the process since I made this slide and I didn't get a chance to update it, but these used to be gone over every month, all right? Every month, we'd invite all the people that had had an RFO, plus a few other key stakeholders from around the business, to a room, come sit here and listen to us talk through the RFOs, all right? And yeah, the results from the RFO document are shared with these people so they can see each other's failings. Hopefully we can try and find patterns, right? And if you can find patterns, then you can fix patterns. That stuff's quite easy. And this is done, yeah, once a month, basically. And people say, once a month. That's interesting, right? You're an agile organization, you're working within sprints, we've got sprints of 2 weeks, you're supposed to be constantly improving. You told me right back at the start that everything was for a smile and all the rest of it. Why are you waiting a month? And what do you do when Rome is burning down? All right, so when the whole web shop's offline, what actually happens? All right, I'll agree with you, a month is too long to wait. We have rehauled the process. Hopefully I can redo the slides before I deliver this talk next. Basically we're now going to be doing this a lot more individually, a lot more operationally, and we've got the OC, the head of the OC, Jean, who is now going to be looking for those patterns individually, so we don't need to take 40 people out of rotation for an hour once a month. All right, so again, an example of Coolblue making the same mistakes that you guys are making the same mistakes that we're all making, right? 40 people sitting in a room listening to other people drone on about RFOs in a completely separate part of the business also doesn't scale, all right? But what happens when Rome's burning? And for that, we use Slack a lot, all right? And we have, as you'd expect, a Slack room for that, right? Called War Room, basically envisioning all the key military leaders sitting around trying to figure out what the hell's going on. This is basically exactly the same analogy but in digital form. We have 26 people, about 5 or 6 of them, myself included, are always in there. There are developers that come and leave over time, but basically the war room at the start of an incident gets opened by the OC, because the OC, or our operations center, our network operations center, or our customer service, an extension of our customer service department, escalate that and say, this is something that we've noticed is really, really going wrong. Okay? So they open the war room. And in this case, one of the guys from the OC, probably should have blurred his face, says, war room's open. Alright? And then we basically go through a really fun exercise, which I don't have time to go through now, but I have included at the end of the slide deck, so I'll share the slides after the talk. They go through a fun game of, is it this? No. Alright? So, is it network switches are down? No, it's not. Right? Is it that the instances are down? No, it's not. Is it that there was a deployment recently? No, it's not. Right? And by doing that fun process of elimination very, very quickly, you can very, very quickly try and narrow in on the situation and where it went wrong. Okay? We're working as a fun. I told you I'll share the slides with you from Kathleen Dollard, who has a great game that you can do offline, so not in the middle of a war room session, but offline with your teams. There's a fun game to get you into this sort of mindset, which I think is part of failing forward and identifying mistakes and, recovering very, very quickly. My goal over the next few months is to actually have a bot that asks you these questions as soon as the war room's open, right? So have there been any deployments? That's something that a human doesn't need to verify, right? We use GitHub, everything's traceable. Has there been a change in the size of the instances, right? You can query EC2 and ask those sorts of questions. So if you get these questions down to whatever they mean for you guys, right? It might be, have there been any payments gone through, or have there been any boxes shipped, or have there been any, items falling from the sky? I don't know what it means for you guys, but if you can narrow down those questions and figure out what the default placeholders are, you can ask those in an automated way. All right, so that's where we're going with this. So for me, those are some stories about responsibility, autonomy, ownership, and failure at Coolblue, with examples of how we're doing it. If you guys want to continue the conversation, I'm fine with that. You will probably need to come catch me in the break. One question that I did want to ask before we wrap up is, for those of you that have seen the Ups Nada Knopper page, the error page, the fault page, how many of you had a good, successful recovery from that? Yeah, a few. If anyone hasn't, so I deliberately didn't ask you to raise your hand because that's identifying people, but if anyone hasn't had a good experience, please come talk to me after, because at the moment I'm very, very interested in what Coolblue can do to improve the customer experience externally as well. Okay? So come catch me during the break. These were the 4 stories that I had to tell you. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, yeah. Beer doesn't follow this talk, but drinks do. So, yeah, coffee does. Does anyone have any questions? What can I help you with? Yeah. Yes. Sure. Yep. Very true. So the question was basically, with autonomous teams, with teams that are working at their own pace and their own environment, how can you coordinate those for deployment or for release or for features or for revisions? For that, I would go back to the original slides, like the prerequisites, as I mentioned right at the start of the talk, and feature toggles is one of the checkboxes there. All right. For those of you that don't know feature toggles, it's basically a glorified if that says, if this is enabled or if this is checked, do this. If not, do this. You can unit test. You can deploy both of those separately. In your production environment, you'll have one set to the left-hand side, and for your other environments, you'll have it set to the right-hand side. So that's a very powerful, very simple way to solve that problem. An easier way, one that we found at Coolblue, is you just don't have that problem. All right. So we have a lot of teams, guaranteed. Right. I think we've got 35 development teams, or teams under Coolblue Tech, and about 20 something of those are development teams. So developing products for the end user or for the internal user. Those teams have been organized recently, about 12 months ago now, to be individually responsible for the business units as well. All right. So for example, we have a shipping and delivery domain like the example that I showed you today, that has a team lead and a dedicated team. Right? We have a warehousing team, right, or a warehousing domain, in very similar to a DDD type domain. It's a problem space that we've identified within the organization, and they solve everything related to warehousing. So they have a customer service, they have a warehouse representative, they have business stakeholders, they have a demand forecasters, they have all the tools that they need within that one domain or business unit or organizational unit, whatever you call it in your company, so that they are completely independent, or as independent as they can be. All right. So the warehouse management team, as an example, or the warehousing domain, as an example, has 3 warehousing development teams. All right. Occasionally, there needs to be the synchronization between them, as you described. Right. So someone's developing an API, someone wants to consume that API because we've got a service-oriented or a microservices type architecture. Those teams, sometimes do need to communicate, and that's where you'd fall back to feature toggles. But generally, like, how do we release Fietsbezoek, which I was talking about before, delivery by bicycle, all right? That's the responsibility of one team, of 6 devs. They get it done, right? And when they press the button, it goes live. And so they're completely cross-skilled teams, and they're able to make changes across all the systems, all right? Which makes that problem, or the core of that problem, go away, because you're not now waiting on a different team to release a new version of an API for you. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'll start with you. Yeah.
The 1,000 deployments a day.
Yes.
Where do they happen?
Where do they happen? Okay, so the question was basically, where do the 1,000 deployments a day happen? And they all happen from Team City. At this moment, nearly all of them happen from Team City towards AWS. Now, one of the things that I have been scolded on by the teams internally is that a deployment, it's not one PR equals one deployment. All right. So a deployment is a code change going into an environment, or a change going into an environment. And when you think of a deployment as a change going into an environment, these are all sorts of things. Yes, they're PRs being rolled out across many nodes. All right. So you've got 15 deployments of that change across 15 load balanced machines, but also a configuration change, like a Puppet or a PowerShell upgrade, right? That needs to be rolled out to hundreds of machines in the cloud. We do still have a lot of, or not a lot, we do still have on-prem hardware, again, for a lot of the legacy stuff, or a lot of the stuff that's proving difficult to take into the cloud, but that's less and less now. So where do they happen? They happen from Team City towards AWS in this case, and Google Cloud, and some Azure stuff. So, does that answer the question? Yeah, cool. Nice.
Yeah, looking back at the build of PS1.
Yes.
So you put a lot of ownership at the team.
Yep.
Aren't you like misusing Team City a bit then? It also has like build pipelines as code.
Mm-hmm.
So pipelines.
You can.
Which are more native to Team City and have more features of Team City itself, PowerShell, that maybe it's not harder to get your test results back into Team City.
Yep. It's a valid point, right? And certainly something that we discussed internally. So the question was basically, why build PS1, which is dumbs down, removes a lot of the functionality from Team City. Why not use the inbuilt features of Team City? And for me, it comes back to the contract, right? If the infrastructure teams wanted to move away from Team City, which we've seen that they now do, because we don't want to manage these tools ourselves, having used more and more of the Team City integration pieces means that they don't have that flexibility anymore. They need to make sure that whatever they're moving to has the same capability. All right. If the development team, one of the things you mentioned was getting test results back into Team City, so long as the team can make sure that build PS1, which as a side effect can also be run anywhere then, can also be run on your local, can also be run in a development environment that you maintain if you've got a big beefy machine under your desk in some organizations. Those scripts can be reused anywhere. So we saw more power in having that as the contract with reusability or scalability or opportunity for change on either side of that than we did in hunkering down and using more and more and more of TeamCity. We're having a similar conversation about AWS and about how much do we need to rely on AWS, like specific cloud formation templates and parameter names and that sort of stuff. We're having a similar conversation at the moment, because if you go that deep and you set up that sort of infrastructure that way, it's very difficult for you to move away, right? There's specific organizations and companies built around adapting cloud formation templates to Azure PowerShell scripts and Azure configuration as well. So yeah, for us it was defining the contract and figuring out where that sweet spot was, so that those two domains in this case can operate independently from each other.
Yeah. I think it's a balance between speed and adaptability.
Very much so. And at this point we've chosen adaptability. Yeah. Please.
Maybe just a technical question.
That's fine.
Project management question.
Sure.
If you want to, you mentioned before, give those groups autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
Which is basically that they can, if they want to use a different tool,
Yep.
try it.
Yep.
So how do you? But if you were to, let's say, load that team to capacity,
Yes.
to deliver new functionality, they won't have the time to find new ways of improving. So
Yep.
how do you balance that?
Mhm.
Is that you have like you drill your POs to give them time for that, or do they claim it? Or
Yeah, I think it's basically the two answers you've given yourself. So the question was, if the teams are loaded and they're in charge of their own innovation, how do they innovate, right? If they're at 100 or 110 or 120% capacity and these guys are already working overtime, how do you expect them to also move to Kubernetes? Something completely different. It's a great critique of the current system, and you do need to put a lot of power and a lot of trust back into your product owners, back into your development managers, your domain bosses, the support structures and the hierarchy that you have to allow you to buy that time. And you phrased it as, I think, claiming it back or setting aside time, setting aside points, however you want to do it. That's certainly something that we rely on, making sure that the teams don't get to 120%. And that's part of my role, actually, in Coolblue at the moment, making sure that those teams have the time and space and freedom to innovate where they want to. Right now, obviously, this can also go the other way, and all of a sudden you've got a team that's operating at 60% capacity because they've got to try out this new fancy Vue.js and swap everything over from React, right? So it's a constant balancing act, and in that regard, there's a creative tension at Coolblue between the team lead, so the person responsible for the delivery of the development team, and the product owner, who is sitting right there as peers, constantly having that trade-off. So yeah, no worries. As an example, completely hypothetical, I'll deliver those 4 things for you this sprint, but then next sprint I want 4 days, or I want the whole sprint. In 2 sprints from now, I want the whole sprint to do tech debt reparation or whatever, right? Kubernetes integration, yeah, that sort of stuff. Does that answer the question? Yeah. Okay. It's a tough job. It's a very tough job. There's a lot of responsibility there. There any other questions? Great. It's time for coffee. All right.